Welcome to podcast 34 in the series of Who Let the Master Out. We've been talking about how love energy expanded in my life and some of the ways that it reveals itself or is reflected in our lives. You know, there's so many ways that unconditional love energy can express itself, and I'm sharing my experiences so we can see that there is not just one way that love energy shines into the physical realm. There are some who believe that the person on the receiving end of an energy flow has to give permission first. And it's totally fine to believe that if you choose to. You know, I see it like I'm giving someone a gift. Like if I was a billionaire and I went around asking people if they would like $1,000, no strings attached, I doubt anyone would ever say no. I approach love energy the same way. Who wouldn't want it? Even if the character someone is playing here on Earth might seem resistant to the idea of healing or love energy, the soul behind everyone would accept that love energy. So really, we can always send it to anyone at any time. It will surround the person or situation in a bubble of love, and when the soul is ready to use it, it will. No harm is delivered, ever. I would like to share a couple of examples where I sent love energy to people without them knowing I was sending it to them. The first example was when the mother of one of my friends was battling cancer. And this all happened within the first year I had become aware of the power of love energy, and my friend asked me to help her mom. So in my meditations, I would focus on the large circular mass that was inside her, surrounding it with love, instructing it to shrink. My focus was to convert the dark energy into light, and I would picture in my mind bright light around the dark mass, pushing it smaller and smaller and smaller. And amazingly enough, my friend gave me an update that the cancer mass was shrinking. And that, of course, caused me to double my efforts. But one night, as I was visualizing the mass shrinking, her mother's soul came to me in the dream space inside my head, you know, in that third eye world. And she was very loving, but she told me to stop. She said her time here was done and that she was ready to return home. And shortly thereafter, that's exactly what she did. She wanted to go back home to the other side, and she did. Back home where there's nothing but unconditional love. And for me, that experience revealed that I could influence the physical body of someone else without their physical human being knowing. But in the end, it's always up to the free will and choice of every individual to decide what they will and will not allow into their lives. In fact, earlier this year, something new began to happen to me that brings this point home for me. And so usually I would picture the person I was giving love energy to as if they were standing in front of me, and I'd reach out and let the energy flow into them. Well, a few months ago, I went to send love energy to someone, but in my mind's eye, the person standing in front of me began to shrink. Then they turned like on their back and floated up as a little tiny little representation of them in between my hands. And then suddenly their higher being appeared in front of me. And they were huge. They towered above me. And then they slowly moved out their huge hands to the outside of mine and began to let love energy flow through their hands into mine, which then flowed into their human form. Then I felt my higher being put its hands on the outside of their huge hands, allowing love energy to flow into the mix. And then I felt love energy from other beings too, from, to the left and to the right began to flow into my hands, to flow into their huge hands, to flow into my human hands, into that human body that was floating in between my hands. And that other person's higher being just looked at me, smiled, and nodded. They were the ones who were controlling what the love energy did to their physical form. Holy moly. Another example of using this love energy occurred when I was visiting my papa and his girlfriend on Oahu. And interestingly enough, they are here in town right now for a few days for a wedding. Now, I haven't seen them in about 5 years, but it just so happens as I'm recording this podcast that they're physically here. And I created this podcast schedule about 9 months ago, and I didn't live here in Idaho at the time. So I had no idea. Just crazy how these situations just happen. Anywho, after I arrived there in Hawaii, we were there, in their living room chatting about my journey with love energy. And as I was sharing my experiences with how it worked, his girlfriend, who had injured her foot, hobbled over and put her cast onto my lap, asking me to give her some of that energy. Being a retired nurse, she had been introduced to love energy before and was very open to it. So I placed my hands on her cast and I let the love flow. And she felt it through the cast. Her face of surprise was priceless. But the foot heated up in the cast and her pain dissipated. A couple of days later, her pain began to return, so she asked me to zap her again. I asked her if I could try an experiment by letting me send it to her from across the room. And she was game. And as I sent the energy, her face expressed even more shock than the first day. The surge felt more powerful than when I had physically touched the cast. It was just quite an experience. Later, when I returned home to Colorado, where I lived at the time, my papa and I were texting, and he asked me to send energy to her foot again without her knowing, just in order to see if she could feel it. And I do share my father's mischievousness and curiosity, so of course I did it. And within seconds, she texted me asking if I was sending her energy because her foot had heated up. You gotta love it. We're all swimming in the same sea of love. Supporting each other using our unconditional love energy is normal back home on the other side. But we can do the same thing here, knowing that it is okay to send love energy to anyone at any time. If you feel uncomfortable doing this, then consider that maybe fear could be restricting you. You may fear doing something wrong or offending the other person. But I challenge you to examine the roots of your rules around love energy. It can't hurt. It will only free you. Next episode, I'm going to share how the love energy allowed and allows me to pull headaches out of people's heads. Don't worry, it doesn't get gross. Until then, break the cycle. Be free. Be big. Because we're giants in a world full of giants who've been taught that we're weak and small. It's time to rise. It's time to let your master out.